My name is Duke, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend my marriage was flawless. It was not. I have my own challenges. My business was failing. Money was tight, and I was constantly anxious about keeping everything together. Cassandra and I weren't as close as we were. And yes, I noticed the distance, but I never imagined she was drawing away because there was someone else. So I resolved to do something about it. Our anniversary was approaching, and I decided we might simply need a moment. Something that reminds us why we fell in love in the first place. I had arranged a wonderful meal somewhere exceptional. I wanted to make her feel loved again. I wanted to show her that even though life had been difficult, I was still alive. What I didn't realize was that Cassandra had already found happiness elsewhere. We spent the night before our anniversary at home, unwinding after a long day. I was seated on the couch, and she was lying back, half watching television. The night before our anniversary, we were at home, going about our usual business. Cassandra had just grabbed a towel and was about to go to the bathroom for a shower. When I asked, "What are we eating tonight?" she hesitated in the doorway and looked over her shoulder. "Simply use my phone to order. Our usual stuff," she stated casually before disappearing into the restroom. It was a basic moment, one that had occurred numerous times before. However, fate has a terrible way of playing with individuals. As I unlocked her phone, a message notice appeared at the top of the screen, and everything in my life changed in that instant. "Damn, darling, I will miss you this weekend. But I understand it. Anniversary and all. I cannot wait to meet you next week." I read it again. Then again, my mind was blank for a moment. My brain couldn't handle the shock, so my hands moved without thinking. I clicked the message to open the conversation, and that's when I saw everything. I was not prepared. The texts went back several months. Every interaction was charged with anticipation, yearning, and, worst of all, intimacy. My wife had informed this man that she would not be available over the weekend due to our anniversary. And what about him? He was not upset. He understood. He was patient. He was already planning their next meetup. I continued scrolling. My fingers trembled, but I could not stop. Each message I read broke another piece of my heart. She had been living out her fantasies with him. There were things in those communications that I never imagined she would be interested in. I know she would never have done these things with me. That's when I understood it wasn't a mistake. It was not a one-time thing. I made a mistake. She'd created a complete secret existence with this man. And still, every night she returned to our bed. Anger erupted within me, but I knew I needed proof. Moving swiftly, I started collecting screenshots of every message, each photo, every disgusting detail about their conversations. As soon as I finished, I copied everything to my own phone, safeguarding it in case she attempted to remove the evidence. My heart continued to pound even after I put the phone down. The truth was now mine to keep, but I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. I felt my entire universe shift, yet I did not react. Not yet. Cassandra, meanwhile, had finished her shower and was in front of the mirror, going through her customary night routine, moisturizing her skin and tying her hair up, completely relaxed. She hummed sweetly to herself, unaware of the storm developing only a few feet away. She had no idea. When I read those messages that night, everything changed. My life would never be the same afterwards. I could have challenged her right there. I could have, but I did not. I needed to consider it all through before saying anything. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I entered the living room. I grabbed the remote, turned on the television, and attempted to concentrate on something. Anything other than reality falling down around me. But no matter what was on the screen, my mind was preoccupied with what I had just seen. When it was finally bedtime, I couldn't bring myself to enter that room. The thought of lying next to her, a sensation, her warmth next to me, and knowing what she was doing behind my back, it made my stomach turn. I remained on the couch, buried in my thoughts. But as the night went on, I imagined she'd fallen asleep. I finally stood up, gently. I proceeded to the bedroom, dreading each step as we lay in bed. She rolled over to me and rested her hand on my chest. Then she raised her head slightly and leaned in to kiss me goodnight. I backed away and had no idea when these words had crept out of my mouth. I would kiss you, but I do not want to taste your guy. Cassandra halted, her lips hovering inches from mine and her eyes, still heavy with sleep, widened in one instant. Then she slowly pulled back. What? What exactly are you talking about? She stammered, her voice shaking. Her expression was carefully bland. I almost chuckled, not because it was humorous, but because she was so predictable. How quickly she went into denial, as if she believed she could gaslight her way out of this. I didn't bother to play along. I got up, reached over to my nightstand, grabbed my phone, and opened the folder where I'd saved everything. Then, in the same calm voice, I began reading line by line, word by word, her own words, her messages for him. I barely made it through the first few messages before she snapped. She pounced at my phone, wanting to take it away. Wait, please let me clarify. She cried and tried to take it from me, but I was faster. I pulled back, moving off the bed and keeping it just out of reach. She dropped on the bed, sobbing with her hands covering her face. I apologize, she choked in between strained breaths. It was an error, Duke. It was a moment of vulnerability. I said nothing. I was simply tempted. That's all it was. I wanted to explore my kinks, but you were constantly busy, and I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I tilted my head, studied her, and then inquired in the calmest tone I could muster. How do you feel knowing what you do with your mouth and still wanting to kiss me with it? She did not respond because what could she say? She just sat there, motionless, shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. And I didn't care anymore. Without saying anything further, I turned around and left the room, leaving her alone in the mess she had made. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't sleeping beside her. The days after that night were a blur. I wish I could tell you. I had a great insight. Then I awoke the next morning with a clear head and a firm strategy. But I did not. Instead, I simply existed. I went to work, returned home, and went to work again. I came home again. I scarcely spoke. I barely ate. I scarcely thought. I just kept moving. Take one day at a time, like a man caught in the monotony of a life that no longer felt like his own. And Cassandra. She acted as if nothing had occurred. She tries to bring normalcy back into our marriage. She'd ask about my day like she always did, offering a sweet grin here and there in the hopes that I'd reciprocate. She would linger near me, standing just too close and stroking my arm while she spoke, as if to remind me that she was still present at night. She'd get into bed next to me, but I never turned to face her. The distance between us felt like the ocean. I was present, but I was gone. When her casual attempts failed, she became more persistent. One evening I arrived home late. She was already inside the kitchen. The smell of food permeates the house. My favorite food. I came in and noticed the perfectly laid table with the plates waiting, the wine poured. She stood there, hands folded in front of her eyes, hoping I'd say something. I did not. I just looked at the plate, then walked past it and into the bedroom. I didn't touch the food for the next week. She kept trying, but I could sense desperation creeping in. She wanted me to talk, react, and become upset. Anything would have been preferable to the stillness I gave her, but I had nothing else to say. I couldn't view her the same way anymore, and that's when I knew it was a marriage. It was already done. One evening after work, I summoned her to the living room. When she finally sat down, I wasted no time. I dug into my purse, took out a set of divorce papers, and dropped them on the table in front of her. She stared at them for a long time, her expression opaque. Then she looked up at me, her eyes flashing with confusion. "What's this?" she inquired, even though she was already aware. My voice was calm as I talked. "Sign these or I'll reveal your secret affair to everyone you know." For a short second, I noticed something in her expression. Shock, perhaps even a little fear. She realized I wasn't lying. She understood that if I wanted to, I could destroy whatever decent image she still had. The tears flowed like clockwork. She erupted into fresh sobs. Her hands were trembling as she grabbed for the papers. I did not say anything. I just watched her break down in front of me. I imagined in her mind that this was not supposed to happen. Maybe she expected me to forgive her and things would return to normal. Perhaps she expected that time would help me forget. But this was something I could not forget. I waited while she picked up the pen. Her fingers shook. She cleaned her face and wrote her name with each stroke of the pen. Our marriage died, and that was that. There was no major battle, and nothing exciting happened at the last minute. Please. A gentle end to something that should have lasted a lifetime. Cassandra still had her career and money on paper. She was fine, but what she lost was much more significant. She lost her stable home. She lost a husband who was willing to do anything for her. Worse, she lost the respect of everyone who asked why her marriage ended, and when that question came, I wondered if she would speak the truth. You'd think that once the divorce was finalized, it was the end of the matter. She said she'd sign the paperwork, accept the penalties, and go on. But that is not what happened. Cassandra did not want to let go. Initially, the messages were subtle. A simple, "Hey, how are you?" A random meme she thought I'd find amusing. A nostalgic message regarding, "Remember when we had moments?" I disregarded them all. Then the messages became longer. She told me she misses us and what we had. She stated she missed the way I looked at her and held her, the way we could discuss anything. She said she was lonely because no one else understood her like I did. It was nearly funny, almost because of how she spoke. You'd think she was a widow mourning the death of her beloved husband, as if she hadn't personally destroyed our marriage. She wanted to pretend to be the victim. I was not interested. Then one day, she sent me a message that gave me pause. "We don't need to remarry. We can simply live together again." I stared at my phone for a long time, rereading the words. I envisioned her sitting wherever she was, assuming that I'd be desperate enough to accept her back under any conditions, or that I'd be weak enough to allow her crawl back into my life. So I wrote her one farewell note, making it clear that I will never be a part of her life again. Go cohabit with your young love. That was it. This was the final nail in the coffin. She did not respond after that. Perhaps because she finally understood the message. Perhaps she understood there was nothing left to say. Some people abandon love for fleeting pleasure. They risk everything, including their home and marriage, the person who would have supported them no matter what, for a moment of excitement. And by the time they realize their mistake, it's too late. I moved past her. I created something fresh for myself, and if you ever find yourself in my position, I hope you will do the same. But let me ask you, what would you have done? Some of you may believe I should have exacted retribution or done something to harm her back, making her experience the same betrayal she caused me. Here's the next story. "Dad, when are you coming home?" My son's voice crackled over the phone as I came out of another late-night meeting at work. "Soon, buddy," I replied by transferring my briefcase to the other hand. The parking lot was almost empty. The glimmer of my car's headlights sliced through the darkness. Amelia's voice seemed slightly disappointed to me. We both knew it was not true. "Do not stay too late, okay?" "Mom is baking lasagna tonight," he added. There was a pause. He then added, "It's your favorite." I chuckled. "Thanks for the reminder, youngster. I will do my best." As I concluded the call, a peculiar sensation landed in my chest. Amelia's tone was upbeat, but there was something underneath it. Perhaps there was some hesitation. Or was it guilt? I shook my head and attributed it up to tiredness. Driving home, the radio played gently in the background, but my thoughts drowned it out. Work has recently overwhelmed me. Late nights, early mornings, and never-ending deadlines. I wondered if Caroline disliked it. She hadn't said anything, and she didn't need to. Her silences had gotten thicker, and her smiles more forced. When I went through the door, the familiar aroma of garlic and oregano welcomed me. Caroline emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel. "Hey, you're home earlier than I expected," she said. Her grin appeared genuine, but her gaze moved past me to her phone on the counter. It buzzed briefly, and she hastily silenced it. "Yeah, I finished sooner than intended," I responded, pulling off my jacket. "It smells nice in here." "Lasagna night," she remarked carelessly. "The kids are already seated at the table." I followed her into the dining room, where Lena and Amelia were squabbling about the final piece of garlic bread. "Mom told me I could have it." Lena spoke, her green eyes sparkling. "No way." Amelia shot back, keeping the plate just out of her reach. "You took the final one the last time." "Enough. You both," I murmured, sinking into my chair. "Split it. Problem fixed." Lena pouted, but took a knife and sliced the bread in two. As we began to eat, the tension subsided into casual conversation. Caroline joined us with her phone face down on the table. I spotted her staring at it several times. "Is everything okay?" I asked casually, gesturing to her phone. "Yeah, this is just some work-related writing," she replied quickly. Too quick. "Nothing significant." "We're texting you this late?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is new. It's merely a project that I'm helping with," she said, pushing it aside. She shifted the subject to Amelia's scientific project, deftly diverting attention away from herself. Following dinner, I offered to clean the dishes. Caroline paused, then nodded before snatching her phone and disappearing into the bedroom. The youngsters went upstairs. Their laughter echoed dimly along the corridors. I stood at the sink, peering at the soapy water. My thoughts raced. Caroline had always been fixated on her phone, but this seemed different. There was a secret key to her movements now, a carefulness that bothered me, but I put the thought aside. Later that night, when I walked past the children's rooms, I overheard Lena complain to Amelia. I overheard a conversation that altered everything. "Dad's always working," she explained. "Mom is the only one who is genuinely present." "Yeah, but Mom is constantly messaging someone," Amelia responded. "I bet it's Thomas. He is always present when Dad is not." I froze, my heart hammered in my chest, the word Thomas repeating in my mind. Thomas was a family friend whom Caroline had introduced as a former college buddy. He'd visited a couple times, always polite and excessively welcoming. "Who would you choose after their divorce?" Lena's voice came through the crack in her bedroom door. "Mom's new friend, Thomas." "Duh," Amelia answered, his voice full of eagerness. "He is bringing us to Switzerland to fetch me that sports automobile. Mom told me. He is our biological father. They attended college together. It makes reasonable that we have green eyes like him." I froze in the hallway. My body was frozen with incredulity. I didn't know how long I stood there, but every second stretched. The air was thick with the weight of their remarks. Green eyes. Switzerland is a sports automobile. Everything had appeared so natural and commonplace. Suddenly it felt like a lie. My chest tightened. Caroline's cheery smile, her frequent absences, the covert phone calls, late evenings spent working. Everything clicked into place. The parts of a puzzle I hadn't realized existed were finally coming into place. Their jagged edges cut deeply. My children, who I loved and raised. The ones I assumed were mine weren't even mine. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a brief time I pondered barging in and confronting them right there. I was compelled to yell and demand answers, but something stopped me. The air seemed too calm, too charged. I couldn't stand to confront them just yet. Not like this. Instead, I turned and backed away, softly returning to the living room. I needed to think and process. My thoughts raced, yet they were a maelstrom of uncertainty. Caroline's treachery. Or was it a betrayal? I didn't know what to think anymore. Had you been lying to me the entire time, or had I missed something obvious? I paced the floor, trying to make sense of everything. My heart raced in my chest. I could not breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime, I heard the gentle padding of steps behind me. I turned around, surprised to see Caroline standing in the doorway. Her look is unreadable. She clearly overheard the talk. "I was going to tell you," she continued gently, her voice timid and weak. I stared at her, dumbfounded for a time, as the torrent of emotions began to rise. Anger, betrayal, hurt. All of it washed over me like a tsunami, and I felt myself withdrawing into the walls I'd carefully built around my heart. Tell me, I echoed, my voice tense. You were planning to inform me when? Exactly when the children were older, when it was too late. Caroline's lips parted as if to say something, but the words did not come. Her eyes shifted to the floor, and then back up to face me, full with remorse and regret. I never intended for her to go this far, she admitted quietly. It's just happened, and when it happened, I had no idea how to tell you. I could not risk losing you. The honesty in her comments cut through the maelstrom of wrath in my chest. However, that did not make things simpler. If anything, it exacerbated the suffering. I wanted to yell for more answers, but I knew I wasn't prepared to hear them. Not yet. Did you ever consider what this would do to me? I asked, my voice trembling. To us, the family. Caroline flinched, and I noticed the guilt in her eyes. But there was more to the weight she'd been bearing for much longer than I thought. She muttered, I didn't want it to be like this. I never intended to hurt you. So why didn't you simply tell me? I demanded, moving closer, my hands shaking from the power of my words. Why keep this a secret? Why have you lied to me for so many years? Caroline stepped back. The words she was looking for eluded her. I could not. I didn't know how to do it correctly. I ran my hand through my hair, attempting to gather my thoughts. I repeated, you didn't know how to make it right. So you decided it was best to keep me in the dark? You assumed I wouldn't find out? I believed I could manage it. I figured if I could just keep everything together, I could make it work. But things had gotten out of hand. She sighed, her voice full of remorse. I wasn't expecting to fall in love with you, but I did. And when I saw Thomas again, it was all just... She trailed off, unable to continue. I stared at her for a long time. The weight of everything is pressing on me. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. However, there was another portion that I couldn't quite hush. I wanted to comprehend. You should have told me, I eventually spoke, barely above a whisper. Caroline admitted, her voice filled with regret. I'm so sorry. The stillness between us was dense and stifling. I could hear the faraway sound of the kids talking in their rooms, blissfully unconscious of the tempest raging within our home. After what seemed like an eternity, I slumped down on the couch, head in my hands, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Caroline stayed standing, her posture tense as if she expected me to say something for me to do, but I wasn't sure what to do. Do you adore him? I asked. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Caroline hesitated. Her eyes were fluttering with something I couldn't understand. She approached me and quietly sat down near me. I do not know, she whispered. I thought I did, but everything is so complex now. I do not want to hurt you. I gazed at her. I realized I no longer recognized the woman I thought I knew so well. Perhaps I never had. So what happens now? I asked gently. What will happen now? I do not know. She spoke, her voice trembling. I do not have the answers. I stood abruptly, my heart racing in my chest. I need to get some air, I murmured without saying another thing. I stepped out of the house and slammed the door behind me. The cool night air smacked me like a slap in the face, so I took deep, steadying breaths to settle my racing thoughts. My mind was a maelstrom of uncertainty, and everything around me appeared to blur. I had so many questions and no answers. There are so many feelings, but no clarity. I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I went aimlessly through the streets, not aware of where I was headed. The silence of the night felt deafening. Each stride reminded me of the uneasiness I felt. My thoughts kept going back to the kids. Emilio and Lena. Were they mine, or was I merely a surrogate for the true father? The question was not directed at me, but I had no means of answering it. Not yet. I eventually came to a rest at a park bench. The cold metal pressed against my legs. I sat there for what felt like hours, peering into the horizon, unable to avoid the weight of the truth. When I arrived home, Caroline was still seated in the living room, Her eyes were red from crying. The children had gone to bed, ignorant of the storm that had struck their parents. I sat down next her. The distance between us is palpable. We did not converse at first. Both of us were immersed in our own thoughts. Caroline whispered gently, "I don't know what to do." Her voice broke the silence. "I don't either," I responded, my words tinged with uncertainty. I left my residence that night. My mind was racing, unable to absorb the insanity that had just demolished everything I believed I knew. I never knew where I was headed. The streets were vacant. The world seemed unconcerned about the tempest that had just hit my life. My car's engine hummed in a steady pattern, which did little to settle the churning in my gut. I didn't stop till the first rays of dawn illuminated the dark sky. The horizon was tinted pink and orange, but all I saw was a haze. The sun was rising over a world that made no sense anymore. My family, my children, and Caroline. Everything seemed like a horrible joke. The phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't glance at it. Caroline was probably apologizing again, or perhaps Thomas is delivering a smug message about how he won. I didn't care. Not now. The buzzing ceased for a while, and I assumed it had calmed down. But then, just as I was going to stop the car, my phone vibrated again. This time, Emilio sent an urgent message. I unlocked the phone, expecting something ordinary, perhaps a missed call. Instead, I noticed a string of texts from him. "Dad, we need to talk. It's important. I am afraid. You should call me." My heart skips a beat. Emilio. Why did he seem so frantic? I quickly typed out a response. My fingers are shaking. What is happening on Emilio? Before I could send the message, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the panic in Emilio's voice was clear. "Dad, I was playing with Thomas's phone and discovered something. He intends to kill you." The words hit me like a blow in the stomach. My blood runs cold. The man who had taken my family, trust, and life wasn't satisfied with simply that. "You wanted me to die. You found what?" I asked. My voice is barely a whisper. My thoughts raced. "What do you mean?" "I was spying." Emilio spoke, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean to, but I did find messages. There are a lot of them. He has someone, a guy named Carl. I believe they're meeting tonight. He stated he wants you to leave. He said you posed a threat to his future." The world appeared to shift beneath me, and I held the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to yell at Emilio for snooping, but his urgent tone stopped me. "Emilio, listen to me." I spoke calmly, despite the fact that my heart was racing in my chest. "Where are you now? Are you safe?" "I'm at home," he promptly responded. "I am hiding in my room." "But Dad," he said you would not make it through the weekend." I had to take a moment to breathe and steady myself. My mind whirled. Thomas, the guy I thought was trying to establish a future with Caroline and the kids, has been plotting my demise from the shadows. And the worst part? Caroline undoubtedly knew I couldn't get past the image of her standing there the night before, telling me she didn't know what to do. Did she know about it? Is she complicit, or has she also been kept in the dark? Emilio, stay put. Do not go close, Thomas. I'm heading home right now. Do not open the door for anyone, not even him. Do you understand? Yes, I won't. Please hurry. The phone ended, and I slammed my hand on the steering wheel. The sound is strong and disturbing. I needed to think. I needed to act. It wasn't just a betrayal anymore. This was life. There's also death. I hurried back to the house. My thoughts raced. What was Thomas planning? Why now? What the heck was I going to do about it? I was not going to sit back and let him take my life. I created this family and raised these children, and no one was going to take it away from me without a fight. I pulled into the driveway and noticed Emilio's car sitting in the garage. His bedroom window was illuminated, but there was no trace of Thomas's automobile. That was a tiny relief, but I knew better than to believe it. He could be inside now, or worse, lurking in the shadows. I grabbed my phone again and dialed Caroline's number. It rang numerous times before she answered. "Where are you now?" I demanded as soon as she responded. "Where's Thomas?" "I am here," she murmured softly. Her voice strained. "I wasn't sure what you heard, but no." I shut her off. I do not want to hear any more excuses. "I understand what's going on. Emilio discovered the messages. He intends to kill me. Caroline. He has already made the arrangements. What do you know about this?" There was silence on the other end of the telephone. A long, heavy quiet that seemed to go on forever. Caroline ultimately said, "I don't know what to say." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I did not know. I did not. I did not expect him to go this far. Didn't you think?" I echoed, rage swelling in my chest. "How could you not know? You've been with him for several years. How could you not recognize the type of man he is?" I did not want to believe it. She confessed, her guilt apparent. "I thought he might change, that he might be the one I needed. I never imagined this." The sharp edge of my rage began to fade, replaced by the sour taste of betrayal. It was not only Thomas. The first was angry with. Caroline now knew, or suspected, that she had allowed this to happen. She had stood by as her children's and my life were gradually torn apart, or finished. I spoke bitterly, my voice like ice. "I do not want to talk to you right now. Get your belongings and get out. We will deal with this eventually." Before she could react, the phone clicked off. I did not need to hear it. I had nothing further to say. I took a big breath and stepped toward the door. I had no idea what Thomas was intending or how he was going to carry it out, but I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to make a move. The house was oddly quiet. I crept along the hall, listening intently for any sounds. The tiniest squeak of a floorboard sent my heart racing, but it was only the house settling. Amelia's door was closed tightly. I tried the knob softly and discovered it was locked. "Amelia?" I whispered, gently rapping on the door. "It's me." The door creaked open, just enough for Amelia to look out. His face was pallid and drawn. "I wasn't sure what to do," he replied, his voice quivering. I had no idea if he was still here or not. I stepped inside and swiftly locked the door behind me. "You performed well, Emilio. However, we must remain alert. Do you hear anything strange? Please come fetch me. All right?" He nodded. His eyes were wide with fright. I could not blame him. This wasn't a random threat. This was a deliberate, deadly strategy that needed to be halted before it was too late. We sat silently for a few moments. The gravity of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't only about me anymore. It was about ensuring my family's safety. Amelia, even Caroline, if she can be trusted again. However, there was no time for second guessing. I had to act now. Revenge is more than simply a dish best served cold. It is a 5-course feast, and I relished each bite. I could have let my wrath devour me. I could have reacted impulsively, confronted Thomas and caused a scene, but I knew better. No, this needed to be done correctly. They were mistaken if they believed they could destroy my life without consequences. It was time to make them feel the full extent of what they had done to me. Step 1 involved gathering proof. I needed proof, something irrefutable that could ruin them both. I was not going to let anyone slide through the cracks, not after what they had done. I called Rick Danton, a former cop turned private investigator, whom I had met years ago through a business acquaintance. He was careful, professional, and, most importantly, reliable. I met him at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He was waiting by the window, nursing a cappuccino. When I stepped in, he looked up and gave me a little nod. "You are in a rush." "I take it," Rick inquired, already moving a folder across the table. I sat down, grabbed the folder, and opened it. Pages of neatly organized information, bank statements, transaction data, and emails could be found inside. A lot of it was legal jargon, but one thing stood out: proof of Thomas's financial fraud. It was clean, unambiguous, and damning. Caroline's name appeared on several of the documents. Her signature appeared on false paperwork that funneled money into hidden accounts. "Where did you obtain all of this?" I questioned, looking up. It didn't take long to trace his movements. Rick said, "Guys, he's not very cautious when he believes he has control." I looked at the evidence again. This was only the start. It was the initial piece of the puzzle. "Give me more," I murmured, moving the folder back towards him. "I need everything." Rick did not hesitate. "I am on it. You will have it by tomorrow." I stood and walked out of the cafe. My mind is already racing with possibilities. I was no longer simply a betrayed husband. I was a man with a goal. I was not going to let them ruin everything I had worked for. Rick fulfilled his promise the following day. The updated information was considerably worse. There were questionable dealings with offshore corporations, as well as long-standing money laundering activities. Everything is related to Thomas. But what truly piqued my interest were the messages between him and his collaborators. Plans to take the children to Switzerland, buy the house, and leave me with nothing. It was more than just vengeance now. It was about safeguarding what was mine. I was not going to let Thomas and Caroline go off into the sunset with my kids, my prosperity in life, not without a struggle. Step 2 was to seek favors from those who owed me money. The first call went to Steve Alvarez, an old business associate of mine. Steve was now working in law enforcement, and he owed me more than just a few drinks. Later that evening, I met him in a pub. Steve had already taken his normal seat in the rear. I walked over and sat across from him. "You didn't waste time exchanging niceties." Steve commented that you appear to be in need of something. Looking at me with a raised eyebrow, "I need a favor," I replied by slipping a hefty envelope over the table. "This is about Thomas." Steve's eyes flashed with realization. He cautiously opened the packet, taking out the paperwork and scanning through them. The more he read, the tighter his jaw became. "This is serious," he whispered, glancing at the pages. "This guy has a large network of people in there." He paused. "This is enormous. If what you say is true, you will not walk away from this." I nodded. "I need you to get the word out. Make sure he doesn't board that plane to Switzerland. I want to go to court before he departs." Steve stared at me for a long time, as if weighing something in his mind. Then he nodded slowly. "You've got it. I will take care of it." I did not waste any more time. The following few days felt like a blur. I was everywhere at once, pulling cords and pressing buttons, ensuring that everything fell into place. Rick brought me even more evidence. Secret encounters with dodgy characters. A stack of encrypted communications proving Thomas was coordinating everything from the shadows. I maintained my distance from Caroline. She was a distraction that I didn't need just now. Besides, I had no intention of providing her an explanation. Now, I was about to unleash a storm, would dismantle everything she had built. By the end of the week, the situation had intensified. Steve called me in the morning, his voice tight. "Thomas is on the go." He said he was at the airport, attempting to go past security. "We have a team in place. He isn't going away." I had a surge of satisfaction. The trap was laid. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up the phone. When I arrived at the airport, I could see the commotion happening through the windows. Police cars were stationed outside, and policemen were going in and out of the terminal. I stood off to the side and watched as they apprehended Thomas. He got taken off guard, his expression contorted in rage and uncertainty as they placed him in handcuffs. It was not over yet. I had one more chore to complete. I made my way to Caroline's home. The divorce processes were already in progress, but this would be the last blow. I wasn't simply taking away Thomas's freedom. I was determined to make sure Caroline never got the life she imagined she'd have with him. I rang the doorbell, and when she answered, I could see terror in her eyes, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Save it," I responded bitterly. "Your lies and betrayal, they mean nothing to me anymore." She crumpled, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. "Please, do not do this," she begged, her voice muffled by sobs. "I will change. I swear I will change. Please don't take everything away from me." I stared at her for a long time, watching as the lady I assumed I knew broke down in front of me. but there was no compassion in me anymore. There was nothing left except the satisfaction of seeing her world fall. "I am done," I remarked, turning to leave. "You made your choice. You will now have to live with the consequences." Following this, the divorce was immediately formalized. Caroline's sobbing meant nothing to me right now. She had played a role in ruining everything, and now she'd pay the price. Step 3 had been the most difficult of all, taking everything from her, watching her beg for compassion, knowing she had only herself to blame. But I had completed the necessary tasks. The children were safe. My wealth, property, and life were all safeguarded. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a feeling of closure. The nuclear vengeance had succeeded. I had evened the playing field, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Caroline and Thomas suffered. Oh, how they endured. The universe they had spent years creating, built on lies, deception, and betrayal. They crumbled to dust before they could gather their breath. Caroline found herself in a reality far away from the life of luxury she had previously taken for granted. Gone were the days of lavish shopping trips and weekends at elite resorts. She was now living paycheck to paycheck, working 2 jobs to cover her expenses. I learned from a friend of hers that she was working in a dive bar on the outskirts of town, serving beer to people who didn't care about her background. The formerly proud woman had become a shell of her former self. Her nights were long, but her days were even longer. Her flat was modest in comparison to the mansion she had previously lived in. The walls were thin, and the windows let in just enough light to keep the space from feeling like a tomb. I couldn't help but reflect on the numerous hours I'd spent trying to give her the best, only for her to toss it all away. Thomas, on the other hand, was not as quiet about his decline as Caroline. He withered in prison, and his reputation was destroyed in one fell swoop. His sins had all come to light: financial fraud, money laundering, and a plan to eliminate me. It didn't take long before the other detainees discovered who he was, and in that environment, his name had no significance. He was little more than another white-collar criminal. He spent his days in isolation, trying to maintain a low profile. But I knew he'd realize he'd lost everything eventually. His money represents freedom and his future. He was not going to avoid the consequences of his conduct. Not now, not ever. The most difficult part was dealing with the children. It was not their fault. They were innocent. They were caught up in an unfamiliar game. They did not choose Thomas. They did not ask for a life of secrecy. But this is the truth. When it eventually came out, it devastated everything we'd built together. Trust was a delicate thing, and it was difficult to repair when it had been so severely destroyed. I had no idea how to react when Lena initially approached me. She arrived at the door one evening, her face pallid and drawn. It was obvious she had been crying. She tried to disguise it under a veneer of strength. "Dad," she said cautiously, "I need to talk to you." I stood aside to let her in, unsure what to anticipate. I hadn't heard anything from her since things went down, and I could see she was now broken. Fragile was like staring at a stranger. "Sit down," I said, nodding to the couch. "What's happening?" "I don't know how to start," she said, her voice shaking. "I was incredibly stupid. I did not see it. Not till it was too late. I understand you did not ask for any of this," I said while sitting across from her. "But you have to understand something, Lena. You and Emilio, you're still my children. None of this changes. But the falsehoods, these have implications." She nodded and wiped her eyes. I realized I should have known, but I didn't. And when I found out, I felt completely lost. I wasn't sure who to trust anymore, not even me. "Do you trust me?" I inquired, my voice calm yet forceful. She looked up. Her eyes were full with remorse and regret. "I do. I want to, but I am not sure if you will forgive me." "I'm not sure whether I can forgive Caroline," the first said. "But that's not your fault. You are still a kid. And children make mistakes. What counts now is what you do going forward." "I want to fix it," she replied, barely above a whisper. I want everything to be perfect again. It will take time, I said, leaning forward. It'll be difficult, but I'll be here. You are not alone in this. She nodded. Her feelings weighed heavily on her. I could see how much she wanted to mend the damage and make things right, but this was not going to happen overnight. Nothing worthwhile ever happened. A few days later, Emilio approached me. He knocked on my office door with a wary attitude. "Can I speak to you?" he inquired gently. "Come inside," I said, nodding to the chair. He sat down but did not immediately speak. He only stared at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. I waited as he gathered his thoughts. I knew it wasn't easy for him. Hell, it was not simple for me either. I'm not sure what to say. He began with a trembling voice. "I've been reflecting on everything that happened and how I was so blind to it all." "Emilio," I replied, gently cutting him off. "It is not your fault. You were a youngster. You did not ask for any of this." "I understand," he murmured, shaking his head. "But I still believe that I should have known, should have seen it. Sometimes you can't see what you don't want to see," I answered. "We all have blind spots. But what counts now is that, the truth. You understand why things had to go the way they did." He looked up at me, his eyes full with humiliation. "Do you despise me?" I stared at him for a long time before responding. "No, I do not detest you. I despise what happened, but I do not detest you." Emilio appeared relieved, but I could see agony in his eyes. "I'm not sure how to make things right." "You don't have to," I explained. "What you should do now is concentrate on becoming the best person you can be. That is all anyone can ask." We sat silently for a while. The weight of everything is still suspended in the air, but I could sense the barricades slowly crumbling. Trust was not something you could simply rebuild in a day. It required time, effort, and understanding. It wouldn't be easy, but it was worth it. I'd be there for them no matter what. In the weeks that followed, I stayed focused on the kids and helped them adjust to the changes in their lives. I brought them out, spent time with them, and did everything I could to let them know they were still loved. But things would never be the same. The damage was done. Caroline and Thomas had changed everything, but I wasn't going to let them destroy what mattered most. My friendship with Lena and Emilio. We would reconstruct. It wouldn't be quick or painless, but it would be real, and that was sufficient for me. Caroline and Thomas's misery was far from ended. Their acts would have long-term ramifications, and I would be there to witness them. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about knowing that justice had been done. But the actual struggle for me was to go on without letting the past define my future. And it meant focusing on the children and demonstrating that even in the face of treachery, there was still room for love. The months after the divorce felt like a fog. I had spent so much time in the trenches of revenge, picking up the pieces of a destroyed existence, that I had forgotten how badly I had neglected myself. But now that the commotion was over, I was surprised to find peace in unexpected places. The day began to feel more stable. The weight of the past is beginning to lift, however gradually. Alicia messaged me at one of these peaceful periods. "Hey, I heard about everything. I'm thinking about you. We should catch up sometime." I hadn't seen Alicia in years, but I remembered her well from college. She had been a constant, a friend who never faltered. Whatever happened in the flurry of late-night study sessions or hectic weekends, we lost touch following graduation. Each of us is going our separate ways, but I always knew that if I needed someone to talk to, Alessia would be available. I looked at the message for a long time. It wasn't a long message, yet it was precisely what I needed. Just hearing from her seemed like a moment of clarity, a modest reminder that life was more than just the storm I just weathered. I took a big breath before typing reply. "It has been a while. I would love to catch up. How about dinner?" She replied almost instantly. "That sounds perfect. I will find a location." That evening, I met her at a tiny downtown restaurant with soft lighting and a welcoming ambiance. The moment I stepped in, I noticed her sitting at a corner table. Alicia had not altered significantly throughout the years. Her hair was shorter today, but her smile and her posture remained the same. It was the same. She remained the woman who exuded calmness. "Hi, you." She greeted me kindly and stood as I approached. "Hey, you," I said with a smile. I took a seat across from her, and we relaxed into a casual talk. It didn't take long before I realized how much I missed this basic, uncomplicated connection. A friendship in which you did not have to hide anything, where your words weren't entangled in a web of deception and hurt. I found myself talking about the divorce, how everything had unfolded, the aftermath, the children, the house, and the treachery. I did not hold back. Perhaps it was because she was one of the few individuals who knew me prior to the mayhem. Alicia listened without judgment, her gaze never leaving mine as I talked. She did not interrupt. I did not try to offer counsel. She merely allowed me to talk. She gave me something I didn't realize I needed, space to breathe. When I finished talking, she nodded slowly. "You have been through a lot." "Yes," I sighed. "I feel the weight of it all again. I am still processing it. Certain days are easier than others." Alicia smiled gently. "I got it. You don't need to have everything worked out right away." It was humorous in a way I hadn't considered. Alicia was more than a friend all those years ago. But now that I'm sitting with her, I can see she understands me, how she did not rush to repair anything. It made me feel less alone for the first time in a long time. I wasn't burdened by the weight I'd been carrying. We spent the rest of the evening talking, reminiscing about our college years, and laughing over old recollections. By the end of the night, I felt lighter, as if I was gradually releasing the shackles of my past. "I am delighted we did this," I explained as we walked out of the restaurant. "It's been much too long." "Yeah," Alicia agreed. "We should do it again someday." That eventually led to several more dinners, walks, and phone calls. The more time I spent with Alicia, the more comfortable I became around her. There was no need for pretense or a mask. She was just being herself. And in turn, I could just be myself. It wasn't long until I saw her as more than simply an old buddy. After a few hours of talking over a bottle of wine, I decided to take the plunge. I had been thinking. I started hesitantly. "I'm not sure if this is crazy or just the aftermath of things, but I feel a connection with you. I haven't felt this in a long time." Alicia lifted an eyebrow, a slight smile pulling at the corner of her lips. "Are you saying you like me, or are we just discussing the wine?" I chuckled. "I am serious. I guess one do. I believe I've been yearning for something authentic, something honest. And with you, I feel like I've discovered it." She took a lengthy pause. Her eyes never left mine. I had been thinking the same thing. She eventually spoke, her voice gentle yet confident. "I realize this is unexpected, but I've always liked you. Even back then. And I can tell that this is different. You're in a different place now." I stretched out to take her hand. I felt a warmth sweep through me. "I am ready for this. For us." "Suppose you are." She squeezed my hand. Her smile widened. "I believe we've both earned the right to start over." Everything just seemed to fall into place. We took it slowly, allowing us to create something new. There were no unreasonable expectations or pressure to be anything other than who we were. We established a life based on trust and respect rather than need. We spent our weekends hiking, visiting to little cafes, and watching movies. I introduced her to the children. Lena and Amelia were still getting used to everything, but they took to her fast. They recognized what I saw in Alacia, someone who wasn't just attempting to replace their mother, but also offered something unique. Lena, in particular, seemed to warm to her. They would talk for hours over coffee or walk about the neighborhood, and I could see Lena letting her guard down and gradually opening up again. One afternoon, while we sat in the park, Lena gave me a serious look. "I'm delighted. You're happy, Father. You deserved it." It felt like a weight had lifted from my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words, or how much I thought my children would dislike me for attempting to move forward. But they understood. They noticed the difference Alacia made. I came to a startling realization. I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I wasn't simply attempting to keep my head above water in the aftermath of the storm. I was living, and it felt great. Alacia and I grew closer. We traveled, made memories, and laughed till our stomachs hurt. The life I was creating with her was not like the one I had with Caroline. It was healthier, more grounded, and based on truth rather than deception. There were still moments of doubt. Of course, I still had the scars, my worry of being overly trusting. But Alessio remained patient, realizing that healing takes time. She never pressed me. She just gave me the space I needed. We worked together to create something greater than I could have imagined. We've discovered serenity. Moving forward from the past does not imply avoiding it. And with each passing day, I understood I wasn't defined by my past mistakes or the pain I'd experienced. The future was ours to shape, and I was prepared to construct it with her by my side. Caroline and Thomas believed they had destroyed me. When everything fell, I worried that I wouldn't make it out alive. But here I was, standing tall among the rubble of my previous life. What I hadn't realized at the time was that they weren't in control. Finally, they were responsible for their own pain. It was the price for disloyalty. The months following the divorce had been difficult for a while. I couldn't bear to look at myself in the mirror, but I did so gradually and piece by piece. I reconstructed my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but losing everything was the catalyst I needed. It was the first step in determining what was truly important. I used to believe that family was defined by blood and the relationships we were born into. But that belief was destroyed when I discovered Caroline and Thomas's deception. What truly mattered were the folks who supported me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. There was a lot of emotions to handle. The judgments I'd made and the ramifications of those actions had all resulted in a new version of me, a version that didn't hesitate to speak up, to regain trust and walk away from poisonous situations. I'd learned that sometimes losing yourself in pursuit of what you thought you wanted was the only way to discover who you truly were. Lena provided the first clear evidence that things were changing. She called me one afternoon, hesitant at first. I picked up on the other end. "Dad," she replied softly. "Yo, what up?" I inquired, trying to conceal the nervousness in my voice. "I just wanted to say I apologize for everything," she replied quickly. I was perplexed and didn't know what to do. "But now I realize you were just trying to protect us." I took a deep breath. "You do not need to apologize for anything, Lena. You were a child, and you did not ask for any of this. We're all just figuring things out together." "I know," she said, her voice quieter, "but I apologize anyway. I was completely blind to everything. I'd like to do better for you." "For me?" "For Amelia." My heart swelled. "It's not about getting better, Lena. It is about moving forward. We'll get through this together. I am aware of myself. I love you, Dad," she said. And for the first time in a long time, I could hear sincerity in her tone. It wasn't simply a statement. It was a promise. "I adore you too," I said, my voice full of emotion. "You do not need to worry about me. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Emilio had his own way of expressing remorse. He didn't say much, but he came by more frequently. Visit after school or on weekends. We had always had a good relationship. But despite everything, there was a gap between us. Still, he tried, and that was enough for me. Emilio walked in on Saturday afternoon as I was working on a job in the garage. He did not sit down. He leaned against the door frame and watched me for a bit. "Do you need help with anything?" He inquired casually, but the uncertainty in his eyes was clear. "Actually, yes. Would you hand me the wrench?" I replied, nodding toward the workstation in front of me. He grabbed it without saying anything, and we worked together to fix the car, the sounds of tools and metal filling the space between us. There were no extensive speeches or hefty confessions. However, there was a calm agreement. That is how Amelia functioned. You didn't need to say much, but His actions demonstrated his want to be present, that he cared. Later that evening, as we ate supper, Lena mentioned something surprising. "Do you have any regrets, Dad?" she inquired, nibbling at her food. "What are your regrets?" I inquired, genuinely curious. "Everything. The divorce. The way everything went down. Sometimes I think it would have been easier to keep things together, even if it was phony." I paused and thought carefully. What do you think is harder? Lena is not telling the truth. We're being honest with one another, regardless of how difficult things are right now. That is more valuable than any simple way out. Emilio, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "Yeah, and are you pleased now? Like, genuinely happy, not simply going through the motions." It was the first time I understood how closely they were studying me and taking in. I was not only their father, I was someone they learned from, someone who was setting an example, and seeing them admit this made it all worthwhile. I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I was prospering. I lived a life I was proud of, even if it had been constructed from the ground up. Alicia became an increasingly important element of that existence over time. She did more than simply fill Caroline's empty space. She introduced something really new. There was no similarity between them. Alessio was not attempting to replace anyone. She was simply herself, genuine, understanding, and supporting. We spent our time enjoying one another's company, allowing the connection to develop gradually. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Alessia turned to me with a soft grin on her face. "Do you ever consider how different things may have turned out?" she asked. I contemplated her question for a long time. I think about it occasionally. I reflect on my previous life and how it all came crashing down. But then I realize I wouldn't be here with you today if it hadn't happened. She nodded, indicating comprehension. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what is truly important. And now we're creating something better. I smiled at her. The weight of the past has now lifted from my shoulders. Yeah, our days together have become a routine. Comfortable, fulfilling. It was not always great, but it was authentic. We confront the future with optimism rather than fear. Most significantly, I wasn't alone in this. Alicia, Lena, and Amelia stood by me. I had my family, which I had created from scratch, the one who planned to stay. Caroline and Thomas might have thought they were going to destroy me, but they actually offered me the gift of clarity. They showed me what was not worth keeping, and in the process, I found out what it was. I was no longer merely living, I was prospering. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.